In this video, I'm going to share my deck building principles with you. I'm making this video because despite watching many videos on deck building over the years, I think that these topics are often overlooked. I'd like to think that this could be one of the best Commander deck building videos that you'll watch. But you tell me at the end whether or not you agree, and whether you love or hate my take on Sol Ring. Commander is a social game, and it's at its best when it's a bit like a good Dungeons and Dragons session. This is completely unlike traditional competitive Magic formats that are at their core just that competitive, where anything goes in the name of winning. Each game of Commander is an adventure that we share with other people. An adventure where it's the journey and the interesting things that happen that are the important bit, rather than finishing or winning the adventure itself. I believe that if we all think about Commander in this way, it leads to more fun, more memories, and most importantly, more friends. All of which is why I'd like to think we play Commander in the first place. What makes a good adventure? Good companions? Hijinks? Mystery? Politics? Powerful enemies? Maybe plot twists? I think all of this is true in a game of Commander, starting with the cards in our decks. And because of this, I like to seek novelty and be different. My belief is that where other formats are all about removing variance as much as possible, Commander is all about embracing that variance. Not knowing what's likely to happen is half the fun. Where games are a delight of unexpected and novel interactions and plays. To be clear, I don't mean building decks that are full of random cards and lack synergy. Rather, I mean decks built around interesting or rarely seen commanders or ideas that are jam-packed with synergy, using the most suitable and interesting cards in that pursuit, rather than the best or strongest cards in the colors that Commander allows us to play. I doubt anyone's excitedly rushed to tell their friends or reminisced about that game where their opponent created 10 treasures with a dockside extortionist. Or that game where their opponent wiped the board with a farewell. Or that game where their opponent drew 15 cards with the One Ring. They will, however, excitedly talk about how someone made 25 treasures with blood money. Or maybe how someone made a 50-50 Bane of Progress. Or perhaps how someone's horde of rabbits resulted in their own demise by a well-timed massacre worm. This leads me to try and find interesting commanders, or interesting ways to build around a certain commander, or at least just generally disregarding the most common staples in search of novelty. This will result in a deck that's not necessarily the most efficient from a power perspective, but it is the most efficient from a damn that's cool perspective, and damn that's cool is why I'm playing Commander and not Modern. Play more flexible cards, and think more creatively about how you use your cards as tools. The more options we have, the more chance we have of being able to interact with the game. And I love cards that do different things in different situations. As an example, take the Humble Bounce spell. It can be used to swing the tempo of the table by bouncing an expensive permanent like a commander, or it can be used to create some combat hijinks, either saving yourself some damage or preventing an opponent from getting an all-important combat trigger. Or what about defending a fellow player to create an alliance that will benefit you? And if all else fails, what about saving your own stuff when it's targeted with removal? Whilst not every card is a bounce spell, there are tons of cards that we can use to give ourselves more options. Modal spells and MDFCs are obviously fantastic, but I'll give you two recent card choices I made for my Marin deck to show you what I mean. Firstly is Saw in Half. The primary reason I added this card was to proactively do silly things with my own creatures. But Saw in Half's instant speed means I can use it as removal protection to bait out and nullify an opponent's removal spell for extra value. I could also use it on an opponent's creature to build an alliance. And then there's Exhume as a reanimation spell. I chose to include this in my deck as, whilst there's a possible downside, I like the idea of sometimes using that as an opportunity for politics. Chase synergy and play more cards that perform multiple jobs at once. Where I can, I like to play cards that double up on the jobs they perform in my deck. A removal spell that also draws me a card, a creature that's also a chump blocker that also gets me a land, and a sacrifice outlet that also draws me cards. These examples are from my Marin deck, and here are some more that best showcase what I mean by this. Finding the core things we want our deck to do, and then having cards fulfill as many of those things at once, is a little piece of magic that makes a deck hardly ever feel clunky. Play more interaction. Now, this doesn't quite mean the standard play more removal line, which is also true. But with 75% of the game happening at instant speed, having things to do in response to what's happening in the game will create more interesting, engaging, and fun games. It also means one is less likely to get bored if, like me, you have the attention span of a small, well rested puppy. It doesn't even need to be instant spells. It could be instant speed abilities on your permanents, like sacrificing a spore frog to protect oneself or to create an alliance, perhaps returning an opponent's freshly played, scary 6-mana commander to their hand with erratic portal because they tapped out, or perhaps it's gaining 40 life with an instant like Congregate to stave off a lethal attack from the arch enemy of the table, only to return salvo and set up an opportunity for the table to kill them to the cheers of everyone but the arch enemy. Another reason playing more interaction is good is because more meaningful game actions equals more engagement, which equals more fun. The more we are actively engaging with our friends in a game, the more chance we have of interesting things happening. Whether that's purely card-based interactions, or perhaps something like trash talk, jokes, or politics. Having the ability to do something in the game increases the chance we have of making memories. This obviously multiplies when all 4 players in the game are building their decks in a similar engagement-focused way. So I encourage you to share this video with your friends if this resonates. Build focused decks. I used to love decks with lots of random and pet cards, so that each game my deck played a little bit differently and surprised me. With more experience and more decks, I realized that this kind of misses the point, both in terms of fun and performance. It's better to build a deck that does one thing really well and go all in on that strategy. This will yield a more powerful, resilient, and reliable deck, but will also be more interesting, as this focus will drive us into novelty and less obvious card choices. Better to build an extra deck or two that do different things if one wants different playing experiences. Limit repeat copies of cards across decks. I can jam the One Ring into every deck that I build, but the question I ask myself is whether that will create any interesting moments for me and my friends. This is true for most staples, as well as our favorite pet cards. It's better to stick cards in decks where they synergize really well and leave them out of others. This will lead you to filling your decks with much lesser seen and interesting cards, which again leads to more interesting and unique moments for you and your friends. Go on deck building adventures. When I first got into Commander, I did what I assume most would do. I looked up videos about popular commanders and then went to look at deck lists. I then used sources like EDHREC to see which cards I might want to tweak. This led to many situations where I sat down and the table already knew my deck and what I was going to do, probably better than I did. As a new player or group of players, I think that's fine, and probably even a good thing. However, as one grows as a Commander player, I think this groupthink greatly diminishes the chance of interesting things happening in the game, which in turn makes it far less likely that any new exciting memories will be created. Instead, when I find a new commander or archetype that I'm excited about, I like to start really broad, doing a brainstorm about what possible things I might want my deck to do based around that commander or theme. I then use tools like Scryfall liberally, searching up as many different keywords as I can and making a big list of possible cards that fit my themes. Then, as a last step, I'll go to places like Reddit or EDHREC to see whether I've missed anything obvious or amazing. I love EDHREC, but it's the epitome of groupthink, and while that's incredibly helpful, in this mission for novelty, it's a tool to be used with care. Know when to follow and when to break the rules. I want to ensure that my deck has all the fundamental stuff that it needs to be a good deck, and that I have a mana curve that makes the deck smooth to play. That said, Magic decks aren't all the same, and there are times to break these general rules. For example, I don't want to run the recommended 8 to 10 instant speed removal cards in my Marin deck, where I want as much of the deck as possible to be creatures. Instead, that means I need to think carefully about what kind of creatures I have, and that I have that removal need met. But my deck will be more unique, more effective, and more fun if I break the rules. Likewise, my $50 Melek deck runs exactly 3 creatures: Melek and 2 glorified mana rocks. That defies most deck building fundamentals, yet I'd wager that my Melek deck will both intrigue you and will likely win the pot it's playing in, despite it being very different. Last but not least, I try to play cards that I would enjoy losing to. For the sake of our friendships, I think this may be the most important point in the video. It's also possibly the most divisive because it speaks to our mentality as players and the possible baggage that we bring to a commander game. If you've been pub stomped by someone that talked down their commander deck's power, or if you've been held hostage in a 3-hour commander game by someone that said they definitely weren't playing stacks, only to be playing tons of stacks and agonizingly slow win conditions, you'll know what I mean by baggage. I'm not going to present a list of cards that either pass or fail the vibe check, as that would be way too long. But instead, I just challenge you to think critically about whether you'd enjoy playing against the deck you're building, and whether you'd enjoy sitting through 15 to 30 minutes of turns watching it every game. The same process leads me to actively avoid cards that create play patterns that just feel really bad to play against. Cards like Dockside, Jeweled Lotus, Turgid, Nadu, etc. As if this wasn't spicy enough, I also take Sol Ring out of many of my decks. There are exceptions, like my Eldrazi deck where I run it, but let's be real, that deck both needs it, and I'm playing that in pods with a power level, and the crimes being committed go far beyond a Sol Ring. In the average casual game though, I find it warps the game when it hits the table, and I believe that more often than not, all it does is create an unfair advantage. I imagine most of us run it because of some sort of Sol Ring arms race where the idea of not having it when the rest of the pod does is a nightmare. And that if we all just agreed not to run it, or if it were banned, we'd all be much happier. I think that to me, winning a game because I've steamrolled the table is no fun. I find winning is only fun because of a challenge. I hope you found this useful, and if you've got any questions or input, or you've got a deck building principle of your own that you think would be a good addition to this list, please put it in the comments.